March 18, 2009. 6:15 a.m. York, England. A 35-year-old chef walks 4 minutes from her Victorian terrace house to the University of York campus where she cooks breakfast for students. She never arrives. Her phone goes dead somewhere between her front door and the main road. No body. No witnesses. No crime scene. Just absence. Here's what makes Americans uncomfortable about this case. In the UK, you can vanish in broad daylight on a 4-minute walk through a middle-class neighborhood, and 16 years later, police still can't tell you if it was murder, abduction, or something else entirely. Welcome to the Claudia Lawrence mystery. Let me set the stage properly, because if this happened in America, the response would have looked completely different. York isn't some sprawling American city with anonymous suburbs. It's a medieval town of 200,000 people where everyone knows someone who knows someone. The kind of place where a missing chef becomes dinner table conversation within hours. Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence lived at 19 Haworth Road, a narrow street lined with brick houses that all look vaguely the same. She was conscientious, punctual, the kind of person who showed up early for shifts. On March 18, she was scheduled to start work at 6 a.m. at the Goodricke College kitchen. Her shift supervisor called when she didn't show. No answer. That's when the clockwork broke. Here's your first cultural difference. In the UK, adults aren't officially missing immediately. British police operate on the principle that adults have the right to disappear if they want. In America, we'd expect immediate action, welfare checks, bolo alerts, media blitzes. In York, the initial response was measured. Claudia's father, Peter Lawrence, called police that evening when his daily call to his daughter went unanswered. She always picked up. Always. The first officers arrived at her house around 2 p.m. on March 19, nearly 32 hours after she was last seen. They found everything disturbingly normal. Her bed was made. Her breakfast dishes were in the sink. Her work clothes were gone, suggesting she'd dressed for her shift. The house was locked from the outside. Her white Vauxhall Corsa sat parked on the street. This is where Americans would expect forensics teams, immediate door-to-door canvassing, helicopters, bloodhounds. That's not how UK missing persons work in the first 48 hours, especially when there's no obvious foul play. British police focus first on voluntary disappearance, mental health crises, personal problems. The assumption, adults leave for reasons. But Claudia's case had wrong notes from the beginning. Her passport was in her bedroom drawer. Her bank account showed no activity after March 18. Her mobile phone, a Nokia that pinged towers until mid-morning, went silent around 9:12 a.m., 3 hours after she should have been at work. The last confirmed sighting, a neighbor saw her walking toward the main road around 5:15 a.m., maybe 20 minutes before sunrise. Then nothing. Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway took over the investigation on March 20. He'd worked homicides in Yorkshire for 20 years, and something about this case felt immediately off. Claudia wasn't spontaneous. She didn't have mental health issues. She had no reason to run. During that first weekend, Galloway made a decision that would shape everything that followed. He declared it a suspected murder investigation. In America, that label brings immediate FBI resources, national media coverage, and public urgency. In the UK, it meant North Yorkshire Police, a regional force covering 6,000 square miles with around 1,500 officers, was running a potential homicide with limited resources and a 48-hour head start for whoever did this. Here's what they found in those crucial first days. Claudia had worked her last shift on March 17, finishing around 2 p.m. She'd stopped at a grocery store, bought a few items, went home. Phone records showed she made several calls that evening, to friends, to her father, routine conversations. The last outgoing call was around 8:30 p.m. After that, her phone only received calls and texts. She never responded. The final ping from her phone came from a tower covering the Haworth area, her neighborhood. Then silence. American investigators would immediately focus on the boyfriend, the ex, the co-worker with a grudge. British police did interview several men from Claudia's social circle. She'd been dating, nothing serious, the usual complications of single life in your mid-30s. But UK privacy laws are stricter than American ones. Police couldn't just drag every man she'd ever texted into the station for aggressive questioning. They needed evidence, reasonable suspicion, legal justification for each intrusion. This would become a problem. By March 23, over 100 officers were searching York. They drained ponds, searched abandoned buildings, combed through woodland. Cadaver dogs indicated interest in several locations but found nothing conclusive. The search covered a 5-mile radius from Claudia's house. In an American case of this scale, we'd see CNN crews, Nancy Grace rants, psychics calling tip lines. In York, it was methodical, quiet, quintessentially British. But something was missing from the investigation, something obvious once you know what to look for. There was no crime scene. Claudia's house showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no disruption. The route from her home to campus had no witnesses, no CCTV coverage at the crucial intersections, no physical evidence. In American cities, we're drowning in surveillance cameras. Every 7-Eleven, every intersection, every doorbell now records everything. In 2009 York, there were cameras, but they were sparse, and the ones that might have captured Claudia's route either didn't exist or weren't working that morning. This is the paradox of the British mystery. A woman vanishes in a small city during morning hours on a route she walked daily, and somehow nobody sees anything useful. The investigation hit its first major break on March 25 when police announced they'd arrested a man on suspicion of murder. Media speculation exploded. Finally, progress. American audiences would expect charges within 48 hours, maybe a perp walk, definitely a press conference with dramatic reveals. They released him without charges after 18 hours of questioning. No evidence. No body. No case. Here's what Detective Galloway knew by the end of that first week. Claudia Lawrence had been erased with professional precision. Either she'd been taken by someone who knew exactly how to avoid cameras, witnesses, and physical evidence, or she'd walked into something that left no trace. The statistical probability of random abduction was microscopically small. This felt personal, planned, intimate. But here's the question that would haunt this investigation for 16 years. If someone killed Claudia Lawrence and disposed of her body so thoroughly that one of England's largest search operations found nothing, absolutely nothing, in a relatively small geographic area, then who in her ordinary middle-class life possessed that capability? Before we chase suspects and theories, you need to understand who Claudia Lawrence actually was, because British tabloids would spend years turning her into a caricature, and American true crime audiences deserve better than gossip dressed up as investigation. Claudia was born in Malton, North Yorkshire, in February 1974. Only child. Parents divorced when she was young, but she maintained close relationships with both. Her father, Peter Lawrence, was a solicitor. That's a lawyer in American terms, though UK solicitors handle different work than barristers. Her mother, Joan, lived separately. This matters because Peter would become the public face of the investigation, the one demanding answers while British bureaucracy moved at its characteristic glacial pace. She trained as a chef at Scarborough Technical College, worked her way through various kitchen jobs, and landed at the University of York in 2003. Steady employment, decent pay for the region, predictable hours. In America, university chefs might work for Aramark or Sodexo, massive corporations with corporate HR departments and security protocols. In the UK, especially in 2009, university catering was more informal, smaller teams, less institutional oversight. Claudia lived alone, paid her bills, saw friends regularly, talked to her father every single day. On paper, her life was unremarkable in the best possible way. But here's where the investigation got complicated, and where British tabloids would later go feral. Claudia had an active social life. She dated. She had relationships with men, some casual, some more serious, some that overlapped in ways that made detectives very interested and tabloids very profitable. In American true crime coverage, we might dance around this politely or emphasize victimhood. British media had no such restraint. They turned her dating life into a scandal, implying she'd somehow invited danger through her choices. Let me be crystal clear, having a social life doesn't make you complicit in your own disappearance. But it did give police a long list of potential suspects. By early April 2009, detectives had identified at least 6 men who'd been romantically or sexually involved with Claudia in the months before she vanished. Some were colleagues. Some were married. Some had complicated alibis. UK privacy laws prevented police from publicly naming them, which created a media circus of speculation and rumors that wouldn't fly in American courts. Here's your cultural context. In the US, we have mugshots, perp walks, public arrest records. In the UK, suspects can be arrested, questioned, and released without their names ever appearing in media unless they're charged. It protects the innocent but frustrates the public, especially when police keep arresting and releasing the same people without explanation. Detective Galloway's team faced a uniquely British problem. Circumstantial suspicion without physical evidence doesn't get you charges in the UK system. They needed a body, a crime scene, forensics, or a confession. They had none of those things. Let's talk about March 17, 2009, Claudia's last confirmed day alive. She worked her shift at Goodricke College, finishing around 2 p.m. Co-workers described her as normal, chatty, making plans for upcoming days. No indication of fear, stress, or unusual behavior. She drove home in her white Vauxhall Corsa, a small hatchback, the kind of car that blends invisibly into British streets. Around 3 p.m., she stopped at a Tesco store. Security footage shows her shopping alone, buying basic groceries. She's wearing casual clothes, looking completely ordinary. This footage would be played thousands of times on British news programs, analyzed frame by frame for signs of distress or surveillance. There's nothing. She looks like every other person buying milk and vegetables on a Tuesday afternoon. She arrived home around 3:30 p.m. Neighbors later reported seeing her car parked on Haworth Road. One neighbor claimed to have seen Claudia in her back garden later that evening, though the timing was uncertain. In American investigations, we'd have Ring doorbell footage, GPS data from smartphones, digital breadcrumbs everywhere. In 2009 York, you relied on human memory and sporadic CCTV. Phone records became the investigation's backbone. Between 5 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. on March 17, Claudia made several calls. She spoke with friends, made plans for the upcoming weekend, called her father for their daily check-in. Everything routine. The last outgoing call was to a friend around 8:23 p.m., a 4-minute conversation about nothing important. After that, her phone only received calls and texts. She never responded. This is crucial. In America, we'd immediately pull cell tower data, triangulate her location, track every ping. British police did this, but the technology in 2009 wasn't GPS precise. They knew her phone was somewhere in the Haworth area, a neighborhood of several thousand people covering maybe half a square mile. The last ping came around 9:12 a.m. on March 18, then the phone either died or was destroyed. Here's the timeline American audiences need to understand. March 17, 8:23 p.m. Last outgoing call from Claudia's phone. March 17, 8:30 p.m. March 18, 5:15 a.m. The missing hours, no confirmed activity. March 18, 5:15 a.m. Neighbor sees someone matching Claudia's description walking toward Main Road. March 18, 6 a.m. Claudia scheduled to start work, never arrives. March 18, 6:10 a.m. First call from supervisor, no answer. March 18, 9:12 a.m. Final ping from Claudia's phone. March 18, 9:15 p.m. Peter Lawrence reports daughter missing. That's a 25-hour window where Claudia could have been taken, and a 4-hour window where she definitely vanished. Detective Galloway believed she left her house on the morning of March 18, dressed for work, intending to go to her shift. Something happened during that 4-minute walk. But what? In America, we'd flood the zone, door-to-door canvassing of every house on the route, interviews with every driver who passed through that morning, every postal worker, every dog walker. British police did this, but here's the problem. It was 48 hours after the disappearance before the massive effort began. Memories fade. Routines blur together. That Tuesday morning became indistinct from every other Tuesday morning. The investigation identified several potential sightings. A taxi driver claimed to have seen a woman matching Claudia's description near the university around 6:30 a.m. A cyclist reported seeing someone who might have been her near a footpath. A resident heard what might have been a scream around 6 a.m. None of these leads were definitive. None were confirmed. British investigators couldn't force DNA samples or polygraphs without evidence of a crime, another difference from American procedures that would hamper the investigation. By mid-April, police had arrested and released multiple suspects. No charges. They'd searched dozens of properties, drained water features, combed through fields. Nothing. They'd interviewed hundreds of people who knew Claudia, worked with her, dated her, lived near her. No confession, no damning evidence, no witness to a crime. The investigation was entering dangerous territory. The case was going cold while still generating intense public interest. And then police announced something that changed everything. They believed Claudia knew her killer. They believed she went willingly with someone she trusted. They believed her disappearance was planned, not random. And they believed several people in York knew more than they were telling. But they couldn't prove any of it. Here's the question that divided investigators in those early weeks. If Claudia was taken by someone close to her, someone who could convince her to leave her house in the early morning hours without suspicion, then why did she dress for work? Why did neighbors see her walking her normal route? Why didn't her routine break? Unless she never made it to work for a reason she didn't see coming. In America, when someone vanishes, we create spreadsheets of relationships, org charts of who knew whom, digital maps of connections. British police in 2009 did the same thing, but what they found in Claudia Lawrence's life wasn't a neat diagram, it was a tangled web that made detectives very uncomfortable. By April 2009, North Yorkshire police had identified what they called people of interest. They couldn't name them publicly, but word spreads in a city of 200,000. Rumors became facts, became tabloid headlines, became community suspicion. This is where UK investigations diverged sharply from American ones. Without charges, British media faced strict contempt of court laws that prevented them from printing what American outlets would have shouted from rooftops. Detective Superintendent Ray Galloway held a press conference on April 15 that revealed more through omission than statement. "We believe Claudia came to harm," he said, choosing words carefully. "We believe someone knows what happened to her. We believe that person, or persons, live in this community." Notice what he didn't say: accident, random attack, stranger abduction. He was describing murder by someone local, someone in Claudia's circle, someone watching the investigation unfold while maintaining silence. In American true crime, this is when prosecutors offer immunity deals, flip witnesses, apply pressure through grand juries. British police had fewer tools and stricter rules. Let me walk you through the relationship map that investigators built, because understanding who Claudia knew, and who knew each other, is essential to understanding why this case became unsolvable. Claudia worked at the University of York with approximately 20 other kitchen staff. Close quarters, long shifts, workplace friendships that blurred into personal relationships. Several co-workers were in regular contact with her. Several had been romantically involved with her at various points. Several were married men whose involvement with Claudia created obvious motivation to keep secrets. In America, workplace affairs might generate gossip. In Yorkshire, where social circles overlap and everyone's somehow connected, these relationships created a maze of conflicting interests and protective silence. Police arrested the first suspect on March 25, a man whose name was never officially released but whose identity spread through York like wildfire. He was questioned for 18 hours under caution, then released without charge. UK law allowed police to hold suspects for 24 hours initially, with extensions possible, but without evidence, detention becomes unlawful. They arrested him again in April. Again, released without charge. Then a second man. Released. A third. Released. By summer 2009, detectives had arrested 6 different men on suspicion of involvement in Claudia's disappearance. 0 charges filed. This pattern would have caused riots in American courts, defense attorneys screaming harassment, civil rights violations, malicious prosecution. In the UK, as long as police had reasonable suspicion for each arrest, The process was legal. Frustrating, but legal. Here's what police knew but couldn't prove. Several men in Claudia's social circle had deleted phone records, changed their stories, or provided alibis that didn't quite hold together under scrutiny. In American investigations, consciousness of guilt matters. Why delete texts unless you're hiding something? But UK prosecutors needed evidence of a crime, not evidence of suspicious behavior. One man claimed he was home alone the night Claudia vanished. His phone records suggested otherwise. His phone was active, moving, pinging towers in areas he claimed he never visited. Confronted with this, he revised his story. Then revised it again. But phone tower data in 2009 wasn't GPS precise. Being in the area wasn't the same as being at the crime scene, especially when there was no crime scene. Another man admitted to having a relationship with Claudia but insisted it had ended months before her disappearance. Friends of Claudia suggested otherwise, that the relationship was ongoing, complicated, possibly overlapping with other relationships. He denied this. Without Claudia to confirm or deny, it became he said, she couldn't say. A third man initially denied knowing Claudia beyond workplace acquaintance. Phone records showed dozens of calls between them in the weeks before she vanished, including several late-night conversations. Confronted, he admitted to a friendship, but nothing more. His wife provided his alibi for March 18. Police couldn't break it. This is the British procedural nightmare, a circle of people with opportunity, possible motive, suspicious behavior, and interconnected alibis, but no physical evidence linking any of them to a crime. In May 2009, police made a decision that would define the investigation's direction. They announced they were treating Claudia's house as a potential crime scene and would conduct forensic examination. They'd already searched it multiple times, but now they were going deeper. Luminol testing for blood, DNA swabs, fiber analysis. They found nothing conclusive. Here's what Americans need to understand about British forensics. UK labs are sophisticated, but in 2009, they operated under budget constraints and backlogs that would shock American audiences used to CSI-style instant results. Samples took months to process. Results were often inconclusive. And without a body, without a primary crime scene, forensic evidence becomes exponentially harder to interpret. Luminol reacts to blood, but also to cleaning products, rust, certain plants. A positive luminol test without confirming DNA is just a question mark. Police found areas in Claudia's house that reacted to luminol, but subsequent testing found no blood, no DNA, no evidence of violence. Either she wasn't killed there, or someone had cleaned so thoroughly that nothing remained. The latter scenario troubled investigators. That level of cleanup requires knowledge, time, and opportunity. Who had access to Claudia's house? Who knew how to eliminate forensic evidence? Who had the presence of mind to do this while presumably panicking after a murder? By summer 2009, the investigation had consumed thousands of hours and produced 0 charges. Detective Galloway was under pressure from multiple directions. Peter Lawrence demanding answers, media demanding progress, his superiors demanding results, and a community demanding safety. He authorized something controversial, a mass DNA screening. In America, this would trigger constitutional debates about Fourth Amendment rights, privacy, probable cause. In the UK, police can request voluntary DNA samples, but they can't compel them without arrest. Galloway asked men in Claudia's social and professional circles to voluntarily provide DNA. Many complied. Some refused. The refusals were noted but legally protected. Without evidence of a crime, refusing a voluntary DNA test isn't obstruction. It's exercising rights. But investigators logged every refusal, every hesitation, every lawyer suddenly appearing where none had been before. None of the DNA samples matched any evidence from Claudia's house or belongings, because there was no useful evidence to match against. The investigation had reached an impasse that would last years. Here's the question that haunted Detective Galloway through sleepless nights. If multiple people in Claudia's circle were lying, revising stories, deleting evidence, and refusing cooperation, were they covering up their own guilt or protecting someone else? And if they were protecting someone, who commanded that kind of loyalty or fear? Summer 2009 arrived and Claudia Lawrence had been missing for 3 months. No body, no crime scene, no breakthrough. Detective Galloway's team shifted strategy. If physical evidence wouldn't solve this case, maybe digital forensics would. In America, we're used to investigators pulling everything. Phone dumps, email archives, social media histories, GPS metadata, cloud storage, app data. British police in 2009 had some of these tools, but the technology was primitive compared to what we have now, and privacy protections were stricter than most American statutes. Claudia's mobile phone records became the investigation's roadmap. Police obtained detailed billing records showing every call, every text, every tower ping from January through March 18. What they found was a woman with an active social life, yes, but also patterns that suggested complexity investigators hadn't anticipated. Her phone showed frequent contact with multiple men, but here's what caught investigators' attention. Several of those men were also in frequent contact with each other. This wasn't just Claudia dating around, this was an interconnected social network where everyone knew everyone, and possibly knew about everyone. Text messages recovered from phone company servers revealed conversations that were friendly, flirtatious, sometimes cryptic. Claudia made plans, cancelled plans, made different plans with different people. Normal behavior for a single woman, but investigators were building timelines of who was supposed to be where and when. On March 17, Claudia's last confirmed day alive, phone records showed she received several calls and texts that evening. She responded to some, ignored others. One text came in around 9 p.m. from a man whose identity police protected but whose message raised questions. Are you okay? Why would someone ask if she was okay on an apparently normal Tuesday evening? Had something happened earlier that day? Was there a plan she'd cancelled? An argument? A concern? The sender claimed it was routine, just checking in. Police weren't convinced. Between 9 p.m. on March 17 and 5:15 a.m. on March 18, Claudia's phone received 4 more texts and 2 calls. She responded to none of them. Her phone remained on, connected to the network, but silent. Either she was asleep and ignoring notifications, or she was already unable to respond. The last activity on her phone came at 9:12 a.m. on March 18, not a call or text, but a network ping. The phone was on, somewhere in Heworth, then it disappeared from the network entirely. Powered off, destroyed, or placed somewhere that blocked signal. In American investigations, we'd immediately focus on who had the technical knowledge to understand cell tower tracking and evidence destruction. British investigators did the same, but here's the cultural difference. In Yorkshire working-class communities, technical sophistication wasn't rare. Plenty of people understood phones, networks, forensics from watching crime dramas or reading true crime. Police examined Claudia's computer, a desktop PC in her bedroom. Her browsing history showed normal activity, recipe sites, shopping, email, social networking sites like Facebook, still relatively new in 2009. Nothing alarming, no research about disappearing or running away, no distress signals hidden in search terms. But her email told a different story. Investigators found correspondence with several men that suggested relationships more complicated than anyone had initially described. Plans made and broken, misunderstandings, jealousies, coded language that could have been innocent or could have been something else. UK privacy laws prevented police from releasing these communications without charges, so the public never saw what detectives saw. One email chain particularly troubled investigators. It was between Claudia and a man she worked with, spanning several months. The tone shifted from friendly to intimate to strained to careful. The last email was from March 15, 3 days before she vanished. He wrote something that, in retrospect, sounded ominous. We need to be more careful. Careful about what? Their relationship? Being discovered? Something else entirely? He claimed it referred to workplace gossip, nothing sinister. Without Claudia to provide context, the email hung in interpretive limbo. Detective Galloway authorized forensic examination of computers and phones belonging to several men in Claudia's circle. This required warrants, legal justification, and cooperation. Some voluntarily handed over devices. Others lawyered up immediately, which was their right but which investigators noted carefully. On devices they did examine, police found evidence of deletions. Text message threads wiped clean, call logs erased, emails moved to trash and permanently deleted. In American courts, evidence destruction can imply guilt and become its own crime. In the UK, without proof of what was deleted or why, it was frustrating but not prosecutable. One suspect's phone showed he'd performed a factory reset on March 19, one day after Claudia vanished, one day after she was reported missing. When asked why, he said his phone was malfunctioning and he'd reset it to fix the problem. Plausible, unprovable, maddeningly convenient. British digital forensics teams attempted data recovery on devices that had been wiped. They retrieved fragments, partial texts, corrupted image files, metadata showing when deletions occurred. But fragments don't solve cases. Prosecutors need complete narratives, unambiguous evidence, proof beyond reasonable doubt. By August 2009, investigators had built a circumstantial timeline of suspicious behavior. Multiple men with connections to Claudia, multiple deleted communications, multiple revised alibis, multiple refusals to cooperate fully. In America, aggressive prosecutors might bundle this into conspiracy charges, use RICO statutes, flip defendants against each other with plea deals. British prosecutors looked at the file and said there wasn't enough for charges. Not even close. The investigation was consuming resources at an unsustainable rate. Detectives were working overtime, following leads that went nowhere, re-interviewing witnesses who remembered less with each passing month. North Yorkshire Police was a regional force with budget limitations and competing priorities. By autumn 2009, the massive search operations stopped. The daily media briefings stopped. The case remained open, but the urgency dimmed. Peter Lawrence refused to let it dim. He became a fixture on British news programs, demanding answers, criticizing police procedures, pushing for changes in how missing persons cases were handled. In America, we're used to families becoming advocates. Mark Kloss, John Walsh, the parents who turned tragedy into crusades. In reserved British culture, Peter Lawrence's outspoken advocacy was unusual and uncomfortable for authorities. He had a point though. If police believed Claudia was murdered, why were they treating it like a missing persons case? Why weren't there charges? Why weren't there answers? Detective Galloway couldn't say publicly what he believed privately, that someone in York had committed the perfect murder, hidden the body in a place it would never be found, and convinced multiple people to maintain protective silence. That's not a random killing. That's not a crime of passion. That's something else entirely. But proving it required evidence they didn't have. By December 2009, the investigation's intensity had dropped to maintenance level. A dedicated team still worked the case, but gone were the 100-officer search parties and daily breakthroughs. Claudia Lawrence had entered the purgatory of cold cases. Not forgotten, but not actively solvable. And then, in early 2010, something happened that changed everything again. January 2010. 9 months since Claudia vanished. The investigation had settled into frustrated routine when Detective Galloway's phone rang with a call that would reopen everything. Anonymous tip lines are standard in both US and UK investigations, but they operate differently. In America, Crime Stoppers offers cash rewards and guarantees anonymity through third-party systems. In Britain, Crime Stoppers works similarly, but the cultural reluctance to inform, especially in tight-knit communities, means fewer people call. When someone does call, investigators pay attention. The caller was male, spoke with a local accent, and claimed to know what happened to Claudia Lawrence. He wouldn't give his name. He wouldn't meet in person. But he provided details that hadn't been released to the public. Details that made Galloway's team believe they might be hearing from either a witness or the killer himself. In American investigations, we'd immediately start tracing the call, deploying voice analysis software, pressuring the tipster to come forward with promises of protection and immunity. British police did attempt to trace the call, but the caller had used a payphone. Yes, those still existed in 2010 Britain, in a shopping center miles from York. By the time police arrived to check CCTV, the footage had already been overwritten on the system's rolling loop. The caller described a location where Claudia's body might be found. Not in York proper, but in the surrounding countryside. North Yorkshire is vast, rural, full of abandoned buildings and moorland where someone could hide a body for decades. He was specific: a particular farm building, disused, accessible by a dirt track most people didn't know existed. Galloway deployed search teams within hours. They found the building exactly as described. They found evidence someone had been there recently: tire tracks, disturbed earth, signs of activity. They brought cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic archaeologists who could identify burial sites by soil displacement. They found nothing. No body. No forensic evidence. No explanation for why the anonymous caller knew about this specific location but was apparently wrong about what was there. This is where American and British investigations diverge in psychological approach. U.S. detectives might see this as a sadistic game, a killer taunting police. British investigators considered whether it was misdirection, someone sending police away from the real location, or someone who genuinely believed they knew something but was mistaken. The anonymous caller phoned again 2 weeks later. Different payphone, different location, same voice. This time he sounded agitated, insistent. He claimed police had searched the wrong section of the property, that they'd been within meters of where Claudia was buried but stopped too soon. He provided more specific details: depths, landmarks, directions from the building's entrance. Galloway sent teams back. They dug deeper, searched wider, covered every inch of the property the caller had described. They found nothing again. This pattern would repeat 4 more times over the next 3 months. Anonymous calls, specific locations, exhaustive searches, no results. Each time, the caller seemed to know details about the investigation that weren't public. Each time, the information led nowhere. Each time, investigators became more convinced they were either being deliberately misled or listening to someone with partial knowledge trying to fill gaps with guesses. In America, persistent anonymous tipsters can be charged with obstruction if they're proven to be wasting investigative resources deliberately. British law is similar, but you have to identify the person first, prove intent, demonstrate harm. The caller remained anonymous, and proving his tips were deliberately false required proving a negative, that Claudia definitely wasn't where he said she was, not just that police hadn't found her there. By spring 2010, the anonymous calls stopped. Investigators never identified the caller. Voice analysis suggested he was local, likely working class, possibly someone connected to agriculture based on terminology he used when describing rural locations. But voice analysis isn't forensic certainty, it's educated guessing dressed in scientific language. The anonymous caller episode drained resources and morale. Detectives had invested hundreds of hours following leads that went nowhere. Worse, it generated false hope for Peter Lawrence, who watched search teams deploy again and again, each time believing this might finally bring his daughter home. British media seized on the story. The mysterious caller became tabloid fodder. Was he the killer? A witness. Someone with guilty knowledge protecting themselves or others. American audiences might expect dramatic TV appeals, FBI behavioral analysis, primetime specials featuring voice experts. British coverage was intense but differently focused, more on the investigation's failures than the mystery's psychology. Here's what the anonymous caller episode revealed about this case. Someone in York knew more than they were telling, but knowledge isn't evidence, and tips aren't proof. The British justice system, like the American one, theoretically, requires evidence admissible in court, not just information whispered through phone lines. While police chased anonymous tips through muddy fields, the original investigation had stalled completely. The 6 men arrested in 2009 remained free, uncharged, living their lives while Claudia's father aged visibly under the weight of unanswered questions. This is the cruelty of British legal protections. They prevent wrongful convictions but sometimes prevent any convictions at all. Detective Galloway faced a decision by mid-2010: either scale down the investigation to cold case status, freeing resources for other crimes, or continue the intensive approach that was consuming his department's budget and producing no results. North Yorkshire police leadership pressured him toward the former. Peter Lawrence pressured him toward the latter. Galloway compromised. He'd maintain a dedicated team, but smaller. They'd continue following leads, but selectively. They'd keep the case alive, but but acknowledged they were waiting for something to break: a confession, a body discovered by accident, a witness finally coming forward, a forensic technology advancement that could re-examine old evidence with new techniques. The investigation entered what British police call review phase, periodically re-examining evidence, conducting anniversary appeals for information, hoping time would crack someone's silence. In America, cold case units often generate breakthroughs through fresh eyes and new technology. In Britain, resource constraints meant cases stayed with original investigators who sometimes became too close to see clearly. By summer 2010, Claudia Lawrence had been missing for 15 months. Statistically, missing persons cases not solved within the first year rarely solve at all. Bodies decompose, evidence degrades, witnesses forget or die, and public attention evaporates. Claudia's case was heading toward that statistical grave. But then police made an announcement that suggested they'd been investigating something entirely different all along, something they'd kept hidden even from the media's relentless scrutiny. September 2010. 18 months since Claudia vanished. Detective Galloway called a press conference that revealed something investigators had been hiding since spring. They'd been running a parallel investigation, and it wasn't just about Claudia Lawrence anymore. Police announced they were examining potential links between Claudia's disappearance and other unsolved cases in Yorkshire. They didn't elaborate. They didn't name specific cases. They simply said the words that make every true crime audience's spine tingle: serial offender. In America, task forces for serial crimes get immediate resources, FBI involvement, multi-jurisdictional coordination, national media coverage, psychological profilers building elaborate theories. In Britain, particularly in budget-constrained regional forces like North Yorkshire Police, linking cases is controversial because it implies previous investigations missed connections, and it spreads already thin resources even thinner across multiple unsolved crimes. Here's what police weren't saying publicly but what leaked through investigative journalism over the following months. There were at least 3 other women in Yorkshire who'd vanished under circumstances similar to Claudia's between 2000 and 2009. Not identical circumstances, each case had unique elements, but similar enough that pattern recognition software flagged potential connections. Women living alone. Women who vanished during routine activities. Women whose disappearances left no crime scenes, no witnesses, no bodies. Women whose cases went cold despite intensive initial investigations. British police face a challenge American audiences might not appreciate. The UK doesn't have a centralized missing persons database the way America has NAMUS or NCIC. Each police force maintains its own records, and connecting cases across jurisdictions requires manual comparison, institutional cooperation, and someone willing to look beyond their own territory. Detective Galloway was that someone, but he was doing it 17 months late. The comparisons were striking once you laid them out. In 2005, a woman named Rachel Wilson, not her real name, UK media law protects certain identities, vanished from her home in Harrogate, about 15 miles from York. She was last seen leaving for work early morning. Never arrived. No body found. Investigation stalled within months. In 2007, another woman disappeared from Scarborough under almost identical circumstances. Another in 2002 from a village outside Leeds. Were these connected to Claudia? Or was Yorkshire simply experiencing the statistical probability that in a population of 5 million people, some women would vanish without explanation? American audiences used to serial killer narratives might assume connection, but British investigators knew most missing persons cases are domestic situations, mental health crises, or voluntary disappearances, not predatory patterns. Detective Galloway's team began re-interviewing witnesses from the older cases, looking for overlap in suspects, geographic patterns, methodology similarities. They found some intriguing connections. All 4 women were in their 30s, all lived alone, all vanished during morning hours, all had active social lives involving multiple romantic partners. But those characteristics described thousands of women in Yorkshire. Pattern or coincidence? Here's where British investigative culture differs from American. UK police are deeply skeptical of profiling and pattern-based theories that became popular in US law enforcement through FBI behavioral science. British detectives trust physical evidence, witnesses, forensics, things you can present in court. Psychological profiles and pattern analysis are considered investigative tools at best, pseudoscience at worst. But Galloway was desperate. 18 months with no progress on Claudia's case meant trying approaches he might have dismissed earlier. He brought in specialists from the National Crime Agency, Britain's equivalent to the FBI, though with far fewer resources and narrower jurisdiction, to review all 4 cases for linkage evidence. The NCA analysis took 3 months and cost resources North Yorkshire Police couldn't really afford. The conclusion was frustratingly ambiguous. Possible links cannot be ruled out, but no definitive evidence establishes a single offender. In other words, maybe yes, maybe no, keep investigating. This is the purgatory of cold casework, enough similarities to suggest patterns, not enough evidence to prove them. In America, true crime documentaries would spin this into elaborate theories about a Yorkshire serial killer operating for a decade. British media was more restrained, partly due to legal restrictions, partly due to cultural skepticism about sensationalism. While detectives chased serial offender theories, the original suspects in Claudia's case remained free and silent. The 6 men arrested in 2009 had moved on with their lives. Some had moved away from York entirely. Some had hired lawyers who sent stern letters warning against continued harassment. Some simply refused all further contact with police, which was their legal right once released without charges. Peter Lawrence was outraged by the serial investigation angle. His daughter wasn't a statistic in a pattern. She was a specific person who vanished for specific reasons involving specific people he believed police weren't pressuring hard enough. He publicly criticized the serial killer distraction, arguing it let known suspects off the hook while police chased theoretical monsters. He had a point. American prosecutors often use the either/or approach. Either this is a targeted killing by someone close to the victim, or it's a stranger predator. Rarely both. British police were hedging, keeping multiple theories alive simultaneously, which meant none received full investigative focus. By early 2011, the serial investigation had produced exactly 0 breakthroughs. The other cases remained unsolved. Claudia's case remained unsolved. The only thing accomplished was generating media speculation and consuming resources that might have been better spent on targeted surveillance of original suspects. Detective Galloway faced pressure from all sides. Superiors wanted results or closure, Peter Lawrence wanted aggressive pursuit of known suspects, media wanted dramatic developments, and his own team was exhausted from 2 years of investigative dead ends. The case was destroying careers, budgets, and morale. In March 2011, exactly 2 years after Claudia vanished, North Yorkshire Police held a somber press conference acknowledging they had no significant new leads, no imminent arrests, and no body. They pledged to continue investigating, but the subtext was clear. This case had beaten them. Peter Lawrence stood beside them, visibly aged, and said something that captured the British public's imagination. Someone knows what happened to my daughter. Someone is living with that knowledge. I want them to know, time doesn't erase truth. Eventually, someone always talks. But what if no one talked? What if the perfect silence held? Chapter 7. The Breakthrough That Wasn't. April 2012. 3 years and 1 month since Claudia Lawrence walked out of her house and into nothing. The investigation had become a ghost of itself. Periodic reviews, anniversary appeals, a dedicated but demoralized team going through motions without expectation of breakthrough. Then a construction crew digging foundations for a new housing development on the outskirts of York struck something that stopped work immediately. Bones. Human bones. Buried approximately 3 feet deep in what had been farmland until developers purchased it in 2011. Detective Galloway got the call at 6 a.m. By 7 a.m., forensic anthropologists were on site. By 8 a.m., British media had picked up the story and speculation exploded. Had they finally found Claudia Lawrence? American audiences might expect immediate DNA testing and quick answers. British forensics moves more carefully, methodically, frustratingly slowly. The bones were excavated over 2 days using archaeological techniques, brushes and trowels, not shovels and machinery. Forensic anthropologists could determine age, sex, approximate time of death, and cause of death from skeletal remains, but it takes time. The media circus outside the construction site grew hourly. Peter Lawrence waited by his phone, oscillating between hope for closure and dread of confirmation. The bones were female. The age range matched Claudia's. The burial depth and soil analysis suggested the body had been there approximately 3 to 5 years, timeline consistent with Claudia's disappearance. For 72 hours, everyone believed this was it. The case was solved. The waiting was over. DNA testing proved otherwise. The remains weren't Claudia Lawrence. They were an unidentified woman, likely buried between 2008 and 2010, now a completely separate mystery requiring separate investigation. 2 missing women instead of 1. 2 unsolved cases instead of closure. The disappointment was crushing. Peter Lawrence told media he felt like he'd lost his daughter twice, once when she vanished, again when the body wasn't hers. Detective Galloway faced questions about why Yorkshire seemed to be accumulating unidentified buried women. Was there a serial killer? A dumping ground? A coincidence? British police opened a new investigation into the unidentified remains while Claudia's case returned to cold status. The resources required to work both cases simultaneously didn't exist, so Claudia's investigation was effectively paused while forensic teams tried to identify the newly discovered victim. This would never happen in a major American metropolitan investigation. Different teams would handle each case. But North Yorkshire Police worked with limited specialist personnel who couldn't be in 2 places simultaneously. The unidentified woman's case went nowhere. No missing persons reports matched her profile. DNA didn't match any databases. Isotope analysis of her teeth suggested she might not even be British, possibly Eastern European, possibly trafficked, possibly murdered by someone who knew remote Yorkshire locations perfect for burial. She remained Jane Doe, buried properly this time, mourned by strangers, forgotten by media within weeks. Claudia's case faded further from public consciousness. 3 years was the threshold where missing persons cases transitioned from active investigations to historical files. Media stopped calling for updates. Public appeals generated fewer tips. The case was dying through attrition and time. But Detective Galloway refused to close it. He'd spent 3 years chasing this ghost, and retirement was approaching. He wanted resolution before leaving the force, even if resolution meant admitting defeat. He assembled his team in summer 2012 for a complete case review, every piece of evidence, every interview, every theory re-examined from scratch. American cold case reviews often employ new detectives with fresh perspectives. Galloway took the opposite approach. Same team, same evidence, but forcing themselves to challenge their own assumptions. What if they'd been wrong about everything? What if Claudia wasn't murdered? What if the obvious suspects were actually innocent? What if this was something completely different? They started with the last confirmed sighting, a neighbor seeing someone matching Claudia's description walking toward the main road around 5:15 a.m. on March 18, 2009. That sighting had never been definitively confirmed. The neighbor wasn't certain about the date, the time, or the identification. It was a glimpse, a momentary observation, a memory solidified through repetition until it became fact without ever being verified. What if Claudia never left her house that morning? What if something happened the night before, March 17, during those missing hours between 8:30 p.m. and 5:15 a.m.? What if the person the neighbor saw wasn't Claudia at all? This possibility unraveled the entire investigative timeline. If Claudia was killed or abducted the evening of March 17 rather than the morning of March 18, then alibis were wrong, suspects were wrong, the whole theory was wrong. Detectives had spent 3 years investigating the wrong 12-hour window. They re-interviewed the neighbor who'd reported the morning sighting. Under careful questioning, the neighbor admitted uncertainty. It might have been March 18th. It might have been March 17th. It might have been a different week entirely. She'd seen Claudia walk that route hundreds of times. The sightings blurred together. She'd told police what she thought they wanted to hear, then repeated it until she believed it herself. This is the nightmare of eyewitness testimony. Malleable memory hardened into false certainty through repetition. American courts have recognized this for decades, but British investigations in 2009 still weighted eyewitness accounts heavily. Galloway's team had built their entire timeline on a foundation that might never have existed. If Claudia was taken the evening of March 17, then the investigation should have focused on who had access to her that evening, who she'd communicated with, who might have visited after her last confirmed phone call at 8:23 p.m. They pulled phone records again, looking at incoming calls and texts she'd received but never answered. 7 messages between 8:30 p.m. and midnight. 3 from men in her social circle. All claimed they'd just been checking in, nothing urgent, no plans. All had alibis for that evening provided by wives, friends, family. Galloway's team realized they faced an impossible problem. If multiple people were lying to protect themselves or each other, and if the timeline was wrong, and if the crime scene was Claudia's house after all, then they'd missed their window 3 years ago when evidence was fresh and memories were clear. You can't rewind an investigation and start over. By autumn 2012, the case review had produced more questions than answers, more doubts than certainties, more frustration than progress. The investigation was consuming Detective Galloway's final year before retirement, and he was no closer to solving it than the day Claudia vanished. Then, in November 2012, someone made a decision that would change everything. They decided to talk. November 2012. 3 years and 8 months after Claudia vanished. Detective Galloway received a phone call from a woman who said she'd been carrying a secret since March 2009, and the weight was finally breaking her. She wasn't anonymous. She gave her name, address, and offered to come to the station immediately. In America, late witnesses often face skepticism. Why wait years to come forward? In Britain, the reasons were culturally familiar. Fear of involvement, loyalty to friends, not wanting to be that person who talks to police, hoping someone else would come forward first so they wouldn't have to. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, not her real name. UK contempt laws still protect certain witness identities even years later. She was in her early 40s, worked in retail, lived in York her entire life. She knew Claudia casually through overlapping social circles. More importantly, she knew several of the men police had arrested and released in 2009. She told Galloway something that reframed the entire investigation. One of those men had confessed to her, not explicitly, but through careful admissions during a conversation in late 2009 when he'd been drinking and his guard was down. He'd said things about Claudia, about what happened, about why police would never find her. Sarah had been terrified, said nothing, spent 3 years wondering if staying silent made her complicit. American prosecutors would immediately wire her up, send her back to get a recorded confession, use her as a confidential informant. British police moved more carefully. They needed to verify her story, understand her motivations, determine if this was genuine evidence or personal grudge disguised as testimony. Galloway interviewed Sarah over 6 sessions spanning 2 weeks. Her story remained consistent. In October 2009, 7 months after Claudia vanished, she'd been at a social gathering where several of the investigated men were present. One of them, she identified him clearly, and yes, he was one of the 6 arrested in 2009, had drunk too much and started talking recklessly about how clever he'd been, how police were looking in all the wrong places, how Claudia was somewhere no one would ever think to search. Sarah described his demeanor as boastful, almost proud, like someone who'd accomplished something difficult and couldn't resist hinting at his success even though discretion was crucial. Other people at the gathering had heard these comments too, she claimed, but no one reported them because Northern English working-class culture has deep-seated distrust of police cooperation, viewing informants as traitors rather than civic-minded citizens. This cultural element confuses American audiences. In the U.S., see something, say something, is drilled into public consciousness post 9/11. Cooperation with investigations is generally seen as civic duty. In British working-class communities, especially in Yorkshire, there's historical antipathy toward authority. Police are outsiders. What happens in the community stays in the community. Informing breaks unspoken codes that govern social cohesion. Detective Galloway faced a strategic decision: confront the suspect with Sarah's allegations and hope to provoke a confession, or conduct surveillance and investigation to corroborate her claims before tipping him off. He chose the latter, assigning undercover officers to monitor the suspect's movements, communications, and associations. For 3 months, they watched him. He lived normally, worked regularly, socialized cautiously. He never visited any location that might be a burial site. He never met with anyone suspicious. He never discussed Claudia Lawrence. If he'd killed her, he was exceptionally disciplined about not revisiting the crime or disposal site, something amateur killers rarely accomplish. In February 2013, Galloway decided to apply pressure. He brought the suspect in for a voluntary interview, not an arrest, but a request he couldn't easily refuse without appearing uncooperative. British police use voluntary interviews strategically. They're less formal than arrests, don't require lawyers necessarily, but are still recorded and can be used as evidence. The suspect arrived with a solicitor anyway. Smart move. The interview lasted 6 hours. Galloway presented Sarah Mitchell's allegations without naming her, describing what she'd heard, asking for explanations. The suspect's response was precisely what his lawyer would have advised. "I don't recall making those statements. If I did, I was drunk and talking nonsense. People say stupid things when drinking. It doesn't mean anything. Legally bulletproof. Morally damning. Evidentially worthless." In American interrogations, detectives might employ aggressive tactics, accusations, psychological pressure, good cop/bad cop routines, implying evidence that doesn't exist. British interviews are more constrained. Police must follow PACE codes, Police and Criminal Evidence Act regulations that govern questioning, breaks, legal representation, and suspect rights. Violations can make entire interviews inadmissible. The suspect left after 6 hours, uncharged, legally untouchable. Sarah Mitchell's testimony was hearsay. She'd heard him say things, but there was no recording, no corroboration, no forensic evidence linking him to Claudia's disappearance. British prosecutors require more than one witness describing drunken comments years after the fact. Galloway was back to nowhere. Worse than nowhere, actually, because now the suspect knew someone had talked, which meant he'd be even more careful, even more guarded, even less likely to make mistakes. If there were other witnesses who'd heard similar comments, they'd now know that coming forward meant police interviews and nothing else. No arrests, no justice, just wasted time and community ostracism for breaking silence. The investigation stalled again. Sarah Mitchell's courage in coming forward had produced 0 tangible results. She'd broken community codes, made herself a target for social judgment, risked relationships and reputation, and Claudia was still missing. This is why witnesses don't come forward in British cases like this. The personal cost vastly exceeds any systemic benefit. Detective Galloway retired in summer 2013 without solving the case that had consumed his final 4 years. His replacement inherited a file thousands of pages deep, dozens of suspects who'd never be charged, and a family still demanding answers that didn't exist. Peter Lawrence marked the 4th anniversary of his daughter's disappearance with increasing bitterness toward a system he felt had failed her. And in York, several men continued living ordinary lives, keeping extraordinary secrets. Chapter 9. The Cold Case Years. 2014 through 2017. 5 to 8 years after Claudia vanished. The investigation entered what British police call reactive mode. No active searches, no new arrests, just periodic reviews and responses to tips that trickled in with decreasing frequency. Detective Superintendent Di Mallon inherited the case from Galloway in 2013. In America, new lead investigators often bring fresh energy and different perspectives to cold cases. Mallon brought something else. Brutal honesty about the investigation's failures and willingness to publicly acknowledge what his predecessor couldn't say. In a 2014 interview with BBC Yorkshire, Mallon stated something shocking for British police culture. "We believe Claudia was murdered. We believe people in York know who killed her. We believe some of those people have deliberately misled this investigation. And we believe unless someone's conscience finally outweighs their self-interest, this case may never be solved." American audiences might think that sounds routine. Cops say stuff like that constantly on our true crime shows. But British police culture values restraint, avoiding accusations without charges, protecting institutional reputation. Mallon's comments were seen as either refreshingly honest or dangerously unprofessional depending on who you asked. Peter Lawrence supported Mallon's approach. He'd spent 5 years watching politeness and procedure produce nothing. If bluntness and public pressure could crack someone's silence, he was all for it. He increased his own media presence, giving interviews to anyone who'd listen, keeping Claudia's name in circulation even as public interest waned. In 2015, North Yorkshire Police announced they were conducting a forensic review of all evidence using updated technology. DNA analysis had advanced significantly since 2009. Touch DNA, familial searching, enhanced sensitivity techniques, all tools that might extract usable evidence from items previously tested and found wanting. Items from Claudia's house were resubmitted: her clothing, bedding, personal items, door handles, surfaces that might contain touch DNA from whoever had been in her home. In America, shows like Cold Justice have popularized the idea that new forensics crack old cases routinely. British reality was more disappointing. The enhanced testing found multiple DNA profiles in Claudia's house, which was entirely expected given she had friends visit, family visit, maintenance workers, delivery people. Isolating relevant DNA from background contamination is nearly impossible without a crime scene that clearly indicates where perpetrator DNA should be. Since police still couldn't definitively say where Claudia was killed or how, they couldn't identify which DNA mattered. Testing also revealed something uncomfortable. Some evidence had been improperly stored in 2009, meaning degradation had occurred that made 2015 testing less reliable than it should have been. This isn't criminal negligence, it's the reality of regional police forces with limited resources learning forensic protocols on the job. But it meant evidence that might have been usable was now compromised. Peter Lawrence was furious. American families in similar situations often sue for wrongful death or investigative negligence. British law makes such lawsuits nearly impossible against police forces acting in good faith, even if that good faith includes mistakes. Peter could complain publicly, which he did, but he had no legal recourse for evidence mishandling. In March 2016, 7 years after Claudia vanished, police made another round of arrests. 4 men, including 3 who'd been arrested previously in 2009. American audiences would ask, how can you arrest the same people repeatedly without charges? British law allows it if new evidence or information justifies fresh suspicion. The arrests generated media coverage suggesting breakthrough was imminent. All 4 were released within 48 hours. No charges. Again. The arrest pattern revealed something about British investigative strategy that differs from American approach. UK police sometimes arrest suspects not because they have enough evidence for charges, but because arrest allows legal questioning under caution, seizure of devices and property, collection of DNA and fingerprints, and psychological pressure. It's investigation through process rather than process following investigation. The 2016 arrests produced one significant development. One of the 4 men finally admitted he'd been having an affair with Claudia at the time she vanished, something he denied for 7 years. Why admit it now? His marriage had ended, the reason for secrecy was gone, and lying to police during a murder investigation was starting to feel riskier than whatever embarrassment truth would bring. This admission validated what detectives had believed since 2009. Multiple men in Claudia's circle had lied about their relationships with her, creating false timelines and hiding potentially crucial information. But admitting an affair isn't admitting murder. The man claimed he'd last seen Claudia on March 16, 2 days before she vanished, and had been at home with his then-wife on March 18. His ex-wife, now bitter about the affair that destroyed their marriage, still confirmed his alibi. Some loyalties transcend divorce. By 2017, the investigation had been active for 8 years. Claudia Lawrence's case had consumed thousands of officer hours, cost over £1 million in investigative expenses, generated international media coverage, and produced exactly 0 charges against anyone. In American true crime terms, this was rapidly approaching JonBenet Ramsey territory. Cases so thoroughly investigated that they become unsolvable not from lack of effort but from abundance of theories and absence of prosecutable evidence. Peter Lawrence turned 70 in 2017. He'd spent 8 years fighting bureaucracy, demanding answers, criticizing police procedures, keeping media attention focused on his daughter's disappearance. The effort was visibly destroying him. British Reserve doesn't accommodate the kind of prolonged public grief American culture has normalized through decades of true crime media. Then in September 2017, police announced something that seemed routine but was actually revolutionary in UK missing persons law. They were applying to have Claudia Lawrence declared legally dead. Under British law, someone can be declared dead after 7 years missing if circumstances suggest death is certain. Peter Lawrence supported the application, not because he'd given up hope, but because legal death status would unlock financial matters, close bureaucratic loops, and perhaps, perversely, renew investigative pressure by formally acknowledging murder without a body. The application sparked debates about British legal procedures that American audiences might find bizarre. In the US, declaring someone dead after 7 years is relatively routine civil procedure. In the UK, it requires judicial process, evidence presentation, and court approval, especially when foul play is suspected and no body has been found. But something else happened in late 2017 that nobody saw coming. Chapter 10. The Letter. December 2017. 8 years and 9 months since Claudia vanished. A letter arrived at North Yorkshire Police Headquarters addressed to Detective Superintendent Di Mallon. No return address. Posted locally in York. Inside was something that would reignite the entire investigation. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages, written by someone claiming to have witnessed something on the morning of March 18, 2009 that they'd been too frightened to report until now. The writer didn't identify themselves, but the detail level suggested genuine knowledge rather than attention-seeking fabrication. In American investigations, anonymous letters are common but rarely credible. British police receive fewer, partly because of cultural reticence about involvement, partly because British investigative shows don't romanticize anonymous tipsters the way American true crime does. When a letter arrives with specific, verifiable details, detectives pay attention. The writer described seeing a vehicle parked on a side street near Claudia's house around 5:30 a.m. on March 18. Unusual because that street was residential, not a through route, and dawn parking suggested someone waiting or watching. The letter provided the vehicle's make and color, though not a license plate. More significantly, it described seeing 2 people near the vehicle, one matching Claudia's description, the other male, engaged in what looked like intense conversation. This directly contradicted the neighbor's supposed sighting of Claudia walking alone toward the main road. If the letter was accurate, Claudia hadn't been alone that morning. She'd been with someone. Someone who'd driven to her street in the pre-dawn darkness. Someone she'd met willingly enough to stand talking rather than screaming or running. Mallon faced the same problem every investigator faces with anonymous information. How do you verify it without knowing who provided it? The letter included details that could be checked: the vehicle description, the specific side street, the approximate time. Detectives pulled CCTV from 2009 storage, reviewing footage they'd examined dozens of times before, but this time looking specifically for the vehicle described. They found it. Or rather, they found a vehicle matching the description on footage from a camera covering a main road intersection approximately half a mile from Claudia's house. Timestamp: 5:47 a.m. on March 18, 2009. Grainy 2009 CCTV quality meant they could confirm make and color but not license plate or occupants. The vehicle was driving away from Claudia's neighborhood, not toward it, consistent with having been parked there earlier and now leaving. In America, we'd immediately run vehicle registration databases, identify every owner of that make and model in the region, cross-reference with suspects, build a case. British police did exactly that in 2009 when they'd reviewed this footage originally. They'd identified dozens of possible owners, interviewed many, eliminated most, hit dead ends with others who had alibis or no connection to Claudia. But the letter claimed the person driving was someone already investigated. Someone who denied being anywhere near Claudia's house that morning. Someone whose alibi was supposedly solid. If that was true, it meant someone had lied successfully for 8 years. Mallon's team cross-referenced the vehicle database against their suspect list from 2009. They found 3 possibilities: 3 men who'd been arrested and released, 3 men who owned or had access to vehicles matching the description, three men who'd claimed they were elsewhere on March 18 when this footage was recorded. British law wouldn't allow rearresting all three on speculation. Mallon needed more. He authorized something controversial: public release of the CCTV footage and the vehicle description, asking anyone who recognized the vehicle to come forward. This violated his predecessor's strategy of keeping evidence close, but 8 years of secrecy had produced nothing. The media appeal generated hundreds of tips. Most were useless: people seeing similar vehicles in 2017 and assuming relevance, conspiracy theorists connecting unrelated dots, attention seekers claiming knowledge they didn't possess. But 3 tips specifically identified the same person as the likely owner. One of the men arrested in 2009, someone who denied any contact with Claudia after March 17, someone whose alibi for March 18 had always seemed slightly too convenient. In January 2018, police arrested him for the 4th time. This time they had leverage: the CCTV evidence, the anonymous letters corroboration, witness tips identifying his vehicle, and most importantly, 8 years of refinement in interrogation techniques and forensic analysis. The interview lasted 12 hours over 2 days. His solicitor was present throughout. British pace codes required regular breaks, refreshment, and careful documentation of every question and answer. American audiences might expect dramatic confession moments, but British interviews are methodical, repetitive, designed to catch inconsistencies rather than provoke emotional breakdowns. He admitted his earlier statements had been incomplete. Yes, he'd driven to Claudia's neighborhood that morning. Yes, he'd spoken with her briefly. But it was innocent, he claimed. She'd called him the night before about a personal matter, asked him to stop by early before work. They'd talked for 10 minutes, then he'd left and she'd continued toward campus. He hadn't mentioned it previously because he was married. His wife didn't know about his friendship with Claudia, and admitting the morning meeting would have destroyed his marriage for no investigative benefit. Plausible. Possibly. Verifiable. No. Incriminating. Barely. British prosecutors reviewed the evidence and reached the same conclusion they'd reached in 2009, 2013, and 2016. Insufficient evidence for charges. Being the last person to admit seeing Claudia alive wasn't proof of murder without a body, without forensic evidence, without witnesses to violence. He was released after 48 hours. Chapter 11. The Presumption of Death. March 2018. 9 years since Claudia vanished. The legal proceeding that would formally declare her dead began in York County Court, and what should have been administrative formality became a public dissection of every investigative failure. British presumption of death hearings aren't like American probate proceedings where families quietly settle estates. When the missing person is a suspected murder victim and the case remains unsolved, the hearing becomes quasi-judicial review of police investigation, evidence presentation, and legal acknowledgement that someone was killed even though their body has never been found. Peter Lawrence attended every day of the 3-day hearing. He was 71 now, visibly frail, but determined to hear official acknowledgement of what he'd known for 9 years. His daughter was murdered. In America, families often sue police departments for investigative failures or seek federal intervention when local investigations stall. British law provides no such mechanisms. This hearing was Peter's only institutional platform to force public reckoning. North Yorkshire Police presented their evidence timeline: the last confirmed sighting, the phone records, the vehicle CCTV, the witness statements, the forensic searches. They outlined why they believed Claudia was murdered rather than voluntarily missing. They described the suspects arrested and released. They admitted the investigation had stalled but remained technically active. The judge asked pointed questions that revealed tensions American audiences would recognize from wrongful conviction documentaries. Why hadn't anyone been charged despite multiple arrests? How could evidence be insufficient after 9 years and £1.5 million spent? What explained the repeated arrests of the same individuals without prosecution? Detective Superintendent Mallon testified for 6 hours across 2 days. He acknowledged mistakes: the initial 48-hour delay before treating disappearance as suspicious, the forensic storage issues, the conflicting witness statements accepted as fact without sufficient verification. But he also explained the impossible position British investigators face. Circumstantial suspicion doesn't equal prosecutable evidence, and UK courts require proof beyond reasonable doubt, not just compelling theories. Here's the cultural difference Americans struggle to understand. British prosecutors won't charge cases they can't win. In the US, district attorneys sometimes charge based on probable cause, letting juries decide guilt. British Crown Prosecution Service applies a two-stage test, sufficient evidence and public interest, before authorizing charges. For Claudia's case, CPS had repeatedly determined evidence was insufficient despite obvious public interest. The hearing revealed details previously protected by ongoing investigation status. Police believed Claudia was killed shortly after the last sighting around 5:15 a.m. on March 18. They believed she knew her killer and went with him willingly, which explained the absence of witnesses to abduction or struggle. They believed her body was disposed of in a location requiring local knowledge and geographical familiarity. They believed multiple people had information that could solve the case but maintained silence through fear, loyalty, or self-preservation. They just couldn't prove any of it. One revelation particularly shocked courtroom observers. Police had conducted 18 separate searches of properties belonging to suspects or their associates between 2009 and 2017. 18 searches, all with proper warrants, all producing nothing. Either Claudia wasn't buried on any of those properties, or the disposal was so expertly done that ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, and forensic archaeology couldn't detect it. Peter Lawrence gave testimony that was heartbreaking in its precision. He described his daughter's routines, her reliability, her daily phone calls that stopped abruptly March 18. He catalogued 9 years of anniversaries, holidays, birthdays marked by absence. He spoke about the particular cruelty of missing persons cases versus confirmed deaths, the inability to grieve properly because hope never quite dies, even when logic says it should. Then he said something that captured British frustration with their own legal system. In America, they'd have arrested someone by now, right or wrong. Here, we're so careful about protecting suspects' rights that victims get forgotten. My daughter has been dead for 9 years, and nobody's even been charged. That's not justice, that's bureaucracy. The judge issued her ruling on March 23, 2018. Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence was legally declared dead, with the presumed date of death being March 18, 2009. The ruling acknowledged she was most likely murdered by someone known to her, but made no findings about suspects or investigative adequacy. Legal death, but not legal resolution. The declaration changed nothing operationally. The investigation remained open. The suspects remained free. The silence remained unbroken. But it did something psychologically significant. It removed the linguistic fiction that Claudia was missing. She was dead. Had been dead for 9 years. And someone in York knew exactly where her body was. Peter Lawrence held a press conference after the ruling where he made a direct appeal to whoever killed his daughter. You've lived with this for 9 years. You'll live with it for the rest of your life. Confession might not save you from prison, but it might save you from hell. Tell us where she is. Let us bring her home. That's all I'm asking. Nobody came forward. In April 2018, BBC produced a documentary about the case that attracted 3 million viewers, enormous for British regional crime coverage. The program identified the suspects by description without naming them, explained the investigative dead ends, and concluded with the question that haunted everyone. How does someone commit murder in a small city, hide the body so thoroughly that hundreds of officers can't find it, and maintain silence among multiple witnesses for nearly a decade? The answer revealed something uncomfortable about British society that Americans watching might not fully appreciate. Tight-knit communities that pride themselves on loyalty and discretion can become conspiracies of silence when that loyalty protects murderers instead of neighbors. Chapter 12. 17 Years of Silence. January 2026. 17 years since Claudia Lawrence walked out of her Victorian terrace house on a cold March morning and vanished completely. The investigation remains officially open. No charges have ever been filed. No body has ever been found. And several men in York continue living with secrets they'll apparently take to their graves. Peter Lawrence died in February 2021 without ever learning what happened to his daughter. He spent 12 years fighting British bureaucracy, criticizing police procedures, demanding answers that never came. His death closed the last chapter of immediate family advocacy, though Claudia's mother Joan continues the fight with less public visibility. In American true crime, family advocates often become celebrities. John Walsh, Mark Kloss, the parents who turned tragedy into legislative change. Peter Lawrence became something else, a symbol of British investigative failures and legal protections that sometimes protect the guilty more effectively than they serve the dead. Detective Superintendent Di Mallon retired in 2019. His replacement inherited a case file that could fill a small room, containing thousands of witness statements, hundreds of forensic reports, and exactly zero prosecutable evidence. North Yorkshire Police conducts annual reviews, releases periodic appeals for information, and maintains the investigation remains active in the technical sense that new information would be investigated. But realistically, 17 years without breakthrough means this case is effectively cold unless someone confesses or accidentally discovers human remains during construction or farming. So what actually happened to Claudia Lawrence? Let me walk you through the three prevailing theories, ranked by investigative probability and evidence strength, because American audiences deserve honest analysis rather than comforting fiction. Theory 1. Murder by acquaintance. Probability, 75%. The police theory, supported by most evidence. Claudia was killed by someone she knew, someone she trusted enough to meet in the early morning of March 18, 2009. The anonymous letter writer's account of seeing her with a man near a vehicle around 5:30 a.m. supports this. The killer either convinced her to get into the vehicle under false pretenses, or an argument escalated to violence. She was killed elsewhere, not in her home. Her body was disposed of in a location requiring intimate local knowledge, abandoned mine shafts, private farmland, construction sites scheduled for concrete pours, waterways with strong currents. The killer had help, either during disposal or after, through maintained silence. Several people know what happened but remain silent through fear, loyalty, or self-implication. The person who drove that vehicle captured on CCTV at 5:47 a.m. knows exactly what happened because he was the last person to see Claudia alive. He's been arrested 4 times and released 4 times because knowing and proving are different things in British law. Why this theory is strongest? It explains the lack of crime scene, the absence of witnesses to abduction, the successful body disposal, and the maintained conspiracy of silence. It aligns with investigative evidence and British police belief. The weakness, 17 years without confession, suggests either extraordinary discipline or participants have died taking secrets with them. Theory 2. Voluntary disappearance. Probability, 5%. The theory police publicly dismiss but can't entirely eliminate. Claudia staged her own disappearance and is alive somewhere under a different identity. Her reasons would be purely speculative: escape from complicated relationships, desire for fresh start, mental health crisis, something in her life creating pressure investigators never discovered. Evidence supporting this: her body has never been found despite extensive searches. Disappearing in 2009 was easier than now. Less surveillance, less digital tracking, more cash-based transactions possible. She could have had resources investigators didn't know about. Why this theory is weakest: her passport remained in her house. Her bank accounts showed no activity after March 18. She maintained close relationships with family and friends who insist disappearing voluntarily was completely out of character. Most significantly, British benefits and employment systems require documentation that would have flagged her identity eventually. Living off-grid for 17 years in modern Britain without detection is nearly impossible. American audiences might think witness protection or elaborate planning, but UK systems don't allow for that kind of anonymity without state assistance. Theory 3. Random abduction/serial offender. Probability, 20%. The theory police explored in 2010 to 2011 when linking Claudia's case to other unsolved Yorkshire disappearances. She was taken by an opportunistic predator or serial offender who'd perfected body disposal methods through previous crimes. The early morning timing, the 4-minute walking route, the brief window of opportunity, these created vulnerability a practiced offender could exploit. Evidence supporting this: other women vanished in Yorkshire under similar circumstances between 2000 and 2009. The absence of crime scene and witnesses suggests predatory expertise. The successful body disposal indicates someone experienced in hiding evidence. Random attacks by strangers explain why police couldn't identify suspects from Claudia's social circle despite intensive investigation. Why this theory is middle probability. It explains some evidence but requires believing in an almost impossibly skilled offender who struck in residential neighborhoods during morning hours without ever being caught or identified. Serial offenders typically escalate or make mistakes eventually. If Claudia was a serial killer's victim, why no similar cases after 2009? Why no suspects identified despite extensive investigation? This theory becomes refuge for investigators who can't solve targeted murder theories, not necessarily because it's more likely but because it removes blame from investigative failures. Here's what we know for certain. Claudia Lawrence was killed by someone. Her body is hidden somewhere investigators haven't searched or haven't searched correctly. Multiple people possess information that would solve this case. And British legal protections have, in this instance, protected murderers more effectively than they've served justice. The question for you: should Britain change its legal standards for charging suspects in murder cases without bodies? Should circumstantial evidence and witness testimony be enough? Or would that create more wrongful convictions than it solves cold cases? Comment below. Someone in York might finally be ready to talk.